Thank you very much. As Emma said, I'm Professor Emeritus of Geophysical and Climate Hazards at UCL. Some of you may know my new book, Hothouse Earth, An Inhabitant's Guide, which came out a few days ago. I must admit it's a bit of a grim read, but all that's in there really does need to be said. If you do want a copy, then bookshop.org is the best place to go, I've been told. I want to say a little bit today about where we are now in terms of climate breakdown and global heating and where we're going. It's not a pretty picture, and I really need to start by saying that we have to face the fact that efforts to keep below the 1.5 degree global average temperature rise, which is regarded as a dangerous climate change guardrail, are pretty much dead in the water. If we were to do this, we would need to reduce global emissions by something like 45% by 2030. And in the real world, this really, barring miracles, is not going to happen. And in fact, the trend is upwards. We're likely to see emissions by 2030 14% up. And in fact, it may be even worse than that with the Ukraine war and all the energy issues associated with it. So the brutal truth then is that it's now practically impossible to sidestep dangerous climate breakdown, which will affect everyone and insidiously will insinuate itself into every aspect of our lives. And it's critical we recognize this, because it means that while we have to slash emissions desperately quickly, we will now also inevitably have to adapt to the new conditions of a much hotter planet. I think probably the greatest concern at the moment is the speed with which global heating is translating into extreme weather. And we should remember that this is happening for just over a 1 degree C global average temperature rise. And it was really telling that a mocked up Met Office weather forecast for 2050 was the spitting image of the actual weather map for July the 19th this year, when of course UK temperatures exceeded 40 degrees centigrade for the first time. And this happened almost 30 years ahead of when the Met Office expected. And I think that says it all about how quickly things are proceeding. Now, there isn't going to be any respite, certainly in the near future. Next year looks likely to be an El Nino year, where the Pacific Ocean begins to get hotter. This has a knock-on effect on global temperatures. And so we could see 2023 being the hottest year on record. So that's where we are now. Where are we going exactly? Well, it's a good question. On the basis of current policies, we're on track to see the global average temperature climb about 2.7 degrees C above pre-industrial times by the end of the century. That's well over double what we've seen already, getting up to 3 times what we've seen already. If what are called national determined contributions, which are effectively national promises or targets, if those are stuck to, which is highly unlikely in any case, that figure could be brought down to 2.4 degrees C, which is still well over the dangerous climate change limit. And these national contributions haven't been updated after COP26 by almost every country. So things are not looking brilliant in that particular area. The reality is, if we factor in feedback effects, if we factor in tipping points, then we're likely to see 3 degrees, 4 degrees, or even more global average temperature rise by the end of the century. And this is going to happen quickly, because 1.5 degrees C, the dangerous climate breakdown guardrail, is likely to be exceeded within 10 years, 2 degrees almost certainly before 2050. And of course, 2050 is when the UK government and many other governments around the world are seeking to have net zero emissions. So the fact is, by the time we get to net zero emissions, we will already most likely be above a 2 degrees C global average temperature rise. And even when emissions are way down, even when they're way down to zero, that doesn't mean that the global average temperature will start to come down. It will stay elevated at its highest level for many decades, perhaps centuries to come. So whatever climate change has happened up till then will be locked in for a very long time. And of course, tipping points that have crossed will continue to be tipped. So if the Greenland ice sheet has started to collapse irreversibly, then that will continue even when we get to net zero. If sea level is rising rapidly, that will continue to happen. And in fact, sea level rise in any case is going to go on for centuries after emissions, when and if emissions are brought down. On sea level itself, it's rather disturbing that the rate of acceleration has increased dramatically in recent decades. Sea level is now going up by about a centimetre every 2 years, and there's a worrying sign that this is doubling every 20 years or so. So in that case, we could easily see 2 meters or more of global sea level rise by the end of the century. If there's anyone out there in Boston or Spalding in Lincolnshire watching, that's something you really need to be aware of, because the North Sea will be coming way inland in that part of the UK. And it's sobering, actually, when I'm on sea level, to look back at the last interglacial. It's a period called the Eemian, and it's a time when temperatures were round about what they are now, but sea levels were 6 to 9 meters higher than they are currently. So that's the direction in which we're pretty much inevitably heading. Now, in terms of the impact of climate breakdown in the decades ahead, I just want to mention one statistic that's worth looking at, and that is that by 2050, the world will require half as much food again, but crop yields will be down by as much as 30%. Now, that's clearly a recipe for widespread famine, for war, and for civil strife. And there's no way that the UK is going to be immune from that. It's absolutely clear then that climate breakdown presents the greatest threat to our society and our economy. And it's highly likely, either of these are highly likely to survive in their current form. And even worse than that, the human race faces an existential threat. Worst case scenarios about how bad climate breakdown is going to be have been dangerously neglected. And there are now calls for the IPCC, for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to start looking at these worst case scenarios, because they may well be not that unlikely at all. And the greatest worry is that we'll see a cascading effect of feedbacks that will lead to the planet flipping, its climate flipping into a hothouse state, an irreversible hothouse or greenhouse state, which will involve a doubling of planetary temperatures. Now, at the moment, our planet on average is about 15 degrees C. That could double to 30 degrees C or even more in the worst case. And the bottom line is clearly that our civilization, and quite possibly humanity itself, would simply not be able to survive those conditions. I apologize for being so depressing, and I thank you.